Nicole's spit landed directly on my plate of pot roast, with a wet sound that still haunts me at night. Her words stabbed into my heart like poisoned daggers. "Eat up, you useless old woman. You'll be going to the nursing home soon. You won't even get this much there." But what came after that hellish moment is going to haunt her in nightmares for a long time, because that woman had no idea who she was messing with. It was Sunday, the day I considered sacred for gathering the family around the table. I had been preparing that lunch since 6 o'clock in the morning, with all the love of my 67 years. The aroma of roasting garlic and onions filled the house. The golden brown potatoes rested on the porcelain platter I inherited from my mother, and I had set the table with the pink tablecloth I embroidered when I still believed my efforts would be valued. Leo, my 8-year-old grandson, froze with his fork in the air, his enormous eyes darting between his mother and me as if he were witnessing the apocalypse. Stephen, my only son, the same one I carried for 9 months in my womb and raised alone after his father abandoned us, lowered his gaze to his plate and continued chewing as if nothing had happened. As if his mother didn't deserve a single word of defense. Nicole straightened up in her chair with that cruel smile she had perfected during the 5 years she had been living in my house. Yes, my house, because even though she paraded around here like the queen of the place, this property was still mine. My violet dress, the one I had put on especially for the occasion, now felt like a ridiculous costume. I had done my hair, put a little rouge on my cheeks, and chosen my small pearl earrings, all to feel worthy at my own table. "Didn't you hear what I said, Margaret?" Nicole's voice cut through the air like a saw. "Eat that garbage. After all, in the nursing home that's waiting for you, they won't even give you that." Her laugh sounded like breaking glass, and I felt something break inside my chest as well. I looked at the plate in front of me. The roast I had seasoned so carefully, the potatoes I had peeled one by one thinking of Leo's taste, the tomato salad I had cut into perfect slices, all of it contaminated by the contempt of this woman who had come into my home and turned it into a silent hell. For these 5 years, I had put up with her venomous comments, her looks of disdain, the way she treated me as if I were a maid in my own house. I had endured her ordering me to clean the bathroom when she had guests, forbidding me from using the living room phone, making me feel like an intruder in the place where I had raised my son. But that spit was the straw that broke the camel's back. As I watched Nicole's saliva slide over my food, something definitively broke within me. It wasn't just the humiliation of the moment. It was the accumulation of 1,000 small cruelties, 1,000 silent slights, 1,000 times my son had chosen to remain silent rather than defend me. Tears began to burn my eyes, but I swallowed them down as I had learned to swallow everything in this house. Nicole kept talking, her voice growing sharper and more cruel with each word. "Look at how pathetically you're staring at us, as if we're the ones to blame for you being a burden. Leo, tell your grandmother it's time she understands her place here." My grandson, that little angel with big eyes who used to hug me and ask for bedtime stories, lowered his head and mumbled something inaudible. Nicole had managed to make even him fear me, to see me as something to be ashamed of instead of the grandmother who adored him. Stephen finally lifted his eyes from his plate, but not to defend me. "Mom, maybe Nicole is right. Maybe it would be better if—" His voice trailed off, but I understood perfectly what he meant to say. My own son, the person for whom I had sacrificed my entire youth, was considering sending me to a nursing home to please his wife. The wall clock read 2:30 in the afternoon when I made the decision that would change everything forever. I stood up from my chair with a calmness I didn't understand myself. My legs were trembling, but something inside me had hardened like steel. I took the contaminated plate with steady hands and, without a word, walked to the kitchen. Nicole followed me with her eyes, expecting to see me broken, humiliated, defeated as always. But this time was different. This time, instead of washing the plate for her as I had done 1,000 times before, I raised it over my head and smashed it against the kitchen floor with all the strength in my 67-year-old arms. The sound of exploding porcelain echoed through the house like a war cry. "What the hell are you doing, you crazy old woman?" Nicole appeared in the kitchen doorway, her eyes wide as if she had just seen a ghost rise from its grave. Stephen was behind her, with that panicked look he got when things spun out of his control. I just stood there, surrounded by shards of porcelain, breathing as if I had run a marathon. My hands were shaking, but for the first time in 5 years, it wasn't from fear, but from a rage so pure, it gave me strength I didn't know I had. "What should have been done a long time ago," I replied in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. It was deeper, firmer, loaded with an authority I had forgotten I possessed. "Breaking everything you contaminate with your presence in my house." Nicole took a step closer, her face red with fury. "You're completely insane. Stephen, look at what your mother did. She's losing her mind." She pointed at the pieces of porcelain as if they were evidence of my madness, but I saw something entirely different. I saw the fragments of my dignity that I had finally decided to defend. My son approached with his hands outstretched, as if I were a wild animal that might attack at any moment. "Mom, please, calm down. Let's talk. Let's sort this out like civilized people." His voice was trembling, and for a moment I saw in him the scared little boy who used to hide behind my skirts during a thunderstorm. But it was too late for soft words, too late for arrangements and empty apologies. "Civilized?" I laughed, and my laugh sounded as bitter as cold coffee. "You talk to me about being civilized after your wife spat in my food as if I were a dog? After 5 years of treating me like a servant in the house that my sweat and tears paid for?" Leo appeared timidly in the doorway, his eyes full of tears. My heart broke seeing him like that, but I knew this had to happen. He had to see his grandmother stand up for herself, even if it was for the last time. "Grandma Margaret, are you okay?" His small, broken voice almost made me falter, almost made me go back to being the submissive old woman who cleaned in silence and endured everything with a forced smile. But not this time. I knelt down and caressed his cheek with infinite tenderness. "I'm fine, my love. For the first time in a long time, I am perfectly fine." I gave him a kiss on the forehead and stood up to face the adults who had turned my home into a battlefield. Nicole had regained her composure and was now looking at me with that venomous smile I knew so well. "Perfect. Now we can all see what you really are. A hysterical, violent old woman. Stephen, I hope you now understand why we can't keep living with her. She's dangerous." The words hit me like slaps, but this time they didn't make me bend. This time they straightened my spine even more. "Dangerous," I repeated the word, savoring it. "You're right, Nicole. I am very dangerous. Dangerous to your plan of turning my son into your puppet. Dangerous to your comfort of living for free in a house that doesn't belong to you. Dangerous to your fantasy of being the queen of a castle you didn't build." Stephen stepped between us, but his gesture came 5 years too late. "Mom, please, don't make this harder than it already is. Nicole is my wife. She's Leo's mother. We have to find a solution that works for everyone." "A solution that works for everyone?" My voice went up an octave. "You mean a solution like sending me to a nursing home so your little wife can redecorate my house to her taste? That kind of solution?" The silence that followed was so thick, you could have cut it with a knife. Nicole and Stephen exchanged a look that said it all. They had already talked about this. They had already planned my fate as if I were a piece of old furniture to be disposed of. At that moment, I understood that the humiliation at lunch hadn't been a spontaneous outburst. It had been calculated, designed to provoke exactly this reaction. They wanted me to lose my temper, to seem unstable, to give them an excuse to do what they had already decided to do. But two could play that game. I walked to my room with firm steps, treading on some of the porcelain shards that crunched under my shoes like broken bones. I heard them whispering behind me, probably planning their next move, probably calling some facility to confirm my reservation in the hell they had prepared for me. I opened my bedroom closet and pulled out the suitcase I hadn't used since my husband's death 15 years ago. It was brown leather, with worn corners and an old airport tag still stuck to the side. I placed it on the bed and started packing my clothes, my few books, the photographs of Leo as a baby. I could hear them arguing in the living room, their voices rising and falling like furious waves. Nicole was clearly upset that things hadn't gone as she expected, and Stephen sounded like a man trying to put out a fire with a glass of water. As I folded my violet dress, the one I had put on with such hope that morning, a tear fell onto the fabric. But it wasn't a tear of defeat. It was a tear of liberation, like the ones you shed when a very sad movie finally ends and you can walk out of the theater into the daylight. I finished packing in 15 minutes. 15 minutes to summarize 67 years of life into a brown suitcase that had seen better days. As I zipped it shut, I could hear that the argument in the living room had intensified. Nicole was screaming something about senile dementia and legal responsibilities, while Stephen was repeating like a broken record that everything could be fixed if I just apologized and promised to behave. Behave. As if I were a naughty child instead of the woman who had birthed, raised, and supported the man who was now asking me to behave. I took the suitcase and walked out of my room. The hallway had never seemed so long. Every step on the burgundy carpet I had chosen myself 20 years ago sounded like a drumbeat marking my departure. When I reached the living room, the three of them looked at me as if a Martian had appeared in the middle of their family meeting. "Where do you think you're going?" Nicole had crossed her arms, partially blocking the front door. Her posture screamed authority, as if this were her house and I were a problem tenant refusing to pay rent. "I'm leaving my own house before I get kicked out of my own house," I replied, and my voice sounded calmer than I felt inside. The difference is subtle, but important. Stephen approached with that expression he put on when he wanted to convince me of something. The same face he had made at 12 years old when he broke my grandmother's crystal vase and tried to convince me it was the cat. "Mom, you don't have to leave. We can talk. We can sort this out like adults." Nicole didn't mean. "Didn't mean what?" I interrupted. "Didn't mean to call me a useless old woman? Didn't mean to spit in my food? Didn't mean to humiliate me in front of my grandson?" My voice rose with each question, and I saw Leo shrink behind the armchair like a frightened little animal. I walked over to my grandson and knelt in front of him, ignoring how my knees protested the movement. I took his small hands in mine and looked him straight in the eyes. "Leo, my love, I want you to know that your grandma loves you more than anything in this world, and that nothing that's happening here is your fault. Okay?" He nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Are you leaving forever, Grandma?" The question pierced me like a spear, but I maintained my composure. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I want you to remember that people who truly love us never spit in our food or call us ugly names. Do you understand?" Leo nodded again and hugged me with the desperate strength of a child who feels the world is crumbling around him. Nicole cleared her throat loudly, as if our tender moment was bothering her. "Enough with the drama," she said in the voice she used to address Leo when he had done something wrong. "Margaret, if you're really going to leave, at least have the decency to leave the house keys." I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 67 years weighing on my bones. I looked her directly in the eyes. Those small, hard eyes that had never shown a single shred of genuine affection for me. "The keys to my house stay with me," I said with a calmness I didn't feel. "This property is in my name, paid for with the sweat of my brow and the overtime hours I worked at the factory for 20 years while I raised that son of yours alone, who now agrees with everything you say." The silence that followed was so thick you could have swam in it. Nicole's mouth opened like a fish out of water. She clearly hadn't expected that response. Stephen looked like someone had slapped him, and Leo looked at all of us with the innocent confusion of someone who doesn't understand why adults behave worse than children. "But Mom," Stephen stammered, "we've been paying the utilities, we've invested money in repairs." I laughed, and my laugh sounded like shattering glass. "Paying utilities with what money, Stephen? With the money you earn at that part-time job you got 6 months ago? Or with the money your wife makes selling makeup to the neighbors?" Nicole's face turned red as a tomato. She clearly didn't like her real income being mentioned, which didn't even reach $200 a month on her best days. "You have been living off my retirement pension," I continued, feeling each word return a little of my lost power. "My $450 a month pension that you've been spending as if it were your own, while I had to ask permission to buy new shampoo." Stephen ran his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture he'd had since he was a boy when he knew he'd done something wrong but didn't want to admit it. "Mom, you know the economy is tough. You know we're doing the best we can." "The best you can?" My voice cracked slightly, not from sadness but from a rage so deep it surprised me. "Does the best you can include letting me eat the leftovers while you serve yourselves the large portions? Does it include making me sleep in the smallest room of my own house? Does it include allowing your wife to treat me as if I were her personal maid?" Nicole finally found her voice. "Don't exaggerate. We've always been fair to you. We give you a roof over your head, food." "You give me?" I exploded like a pressure cooker that had been building steam for years. You give me a roof in my own house? You give me food bought with my money? You, who arrived here with one suitcase and 2 dresses, you give me something? Leo began to cry openly, and that broke my heart, but I couldn't stop now. The words poured out of me like lava from a volcano that had been dormant too long. For 5 years, I have been the servant in my own house. I have cleaned your messes, cooked your favorite meals, taken care of Leo while you went out to have fun, and all in exchange for being treated like a nuisance, as if my existence were an inconvenience you have to tolerate. I walked to the front door, dragging my suitcase across the tiles I had scrubbed on my knees hundreds of times. Nicole stepped aside, but her face showed a mixture of fury and something that looked surprisingly like fear. "And what are you going to do now?" she asked me in a voice that tried to sound defiant but trembled at the edges. "Where are you going to go? You have no one else. Margaret, we are your only family." I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. For a second, her words echoed in my mind like a terrible prophecy. It was true that I didn't have many options, that my savings were practically non-existent, that most of my friends had died or were in nursing homes. But then I remembered the spit on my plate, and the strength returned to my legs. "I'd rather be alone than in bad company," I replied without turning around. "And you are not my family. A family doesn't spit in your food. A family doesn't humiliate you. A family doesn't plan to send you to a nursing home to take your things." I opened the door and the fresh afternoon air hit my face like a blessing. For the first time in 5 years, I breathed without feeling like I was suffocating. The street had never looked so wide or so quiet. It was 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, and the neighborhood was resting in that heavy calm that comes after a family lunch. I dragged my suitcase along the concrete sidewalk, feeling every turn of the wheels taking me further from the nightmare my life had been for the past 5 years. I had no plan. I didn't have enough money for a decent hotel. I had no family to welcome me with open arms. All I had was my newly recovered dignity and a suitcase full of memories that hurt less than staying. My legs started to tremble after 3 blocks. The adrenaline that had sustained me during the confrontation was beginning to fade, and the reality of my situation fell on me like a cold rain. I sat on a bench in the park where I used to take Leo when he was smaller, where he would run among the swings while I knitted and dreamed of being the favorite grandmother who was always available. I took my phone out of my purse, that old device Nicole always criticized for wasting battery unnecessarily. The screen showed 3 missed calls from Stephen, but I wasn't ready to hear his empty apologies or his promises that everything would change. Instead, I dialed the number I had saved under the name Helen, work. Helen had been my coworker at the textile factory for 15 years, until we both retired. We had lost touch when I moved in with Stephen, but I remembered she had always told me her door was open if I ever needed it. "Margaret?" Her voice sounded surprised but warm. "What a surprise to hear from you. How are you, dear?" The words got stuck in my throat. How could I explain that I was sitting on a public park bench with a suitcase, without a home, without a family, with nothing but my wounded pride and a pension that was barely enough to survive? "Helen," I finally managed to say, "do you remember you always told me that if I ever needed anything?" "Of course I remember. What do you need? Are you okay? You sound strange." I broke down. All the tears I had held back during the confrontation came out at once, like a dam finally giving way to the pressure. I told her everything between sobs. The spit, the daily humiliations, the conversation about the nursing home, my explosion in the kitchen, the suitcase that now rested at my feet as evidence of my failure as a mother and grandmother. Helen listened without interrupting, making those sounds of understanding that only women who have lived a long time know how to make. When I finished my story, there was a brief silence before her voice, now firm and decisive, filled the receiver. "Margaret, listen to me carefully. You take a taxi right now, and you come to my house. I have a spare room and a full kettle. We can talk about everything else tomorrow. Helen, I can't pay you rent. My pension barely covers." "Who asked you for rent? We're old friends, not a landlord and tenant. Besides, my house is too big for one person. You'd be doing me a favor by keeping me company." I hung up the phone with a mixture of relief and gratitude that made me cry again, but these tears were different. They were tears of hope. of knowing that there were still people in the world who understood what solidarity meant between women who had worked hard their whole lives. The taxi arrived in 15 minutes. The driver, an old man with a gray mustache, helped me with the suitcase without asking why a woman my age was traveling alone on a Sunday afternoon with a tear-stained face. During the ride to Helen's house, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Stephen, Stephen, Stephen. On the 5th call, I decided to answer. Mom, thank God. Where are you? Nicole is very worried. She says maybe we were too harsh, that we can talk. Nicole is worried? I laughed bitterly. The same Nicole who spat in my food is worried about me? What an interesting change of heart. Mom, please come home. Leo won't stop crying. He's asking for you. We can fix this. We can set some rules so we're all comfortable. Rules? The taxi took a turn and I held onto the seat. What kind of rules, Stephen? Rules like I can't use my own kitchen after 8 o'clock at night? Like I can't invite friends over without asking permission? Like I have to be grateful for a plate of food in my own house? It's not like that, Mom. You know it's not like that. It's not? My voice rose. Stephen, for 5 years I have lived like a stranger in my own home. I have asked permission for everything. I have put up with insults. I have cleaned messes I didn't make. I have taken care of your son while you and your wife went out to have fun, and all in exchange for being treated like a burden. The silence on the other end of the line was eloquent. Stephen knew that everything I was saying was true, but admitting it would mean admitting he had failed as a son, and that was something his ego was not willing to accept. Where are you? He finally asked. At least tell me where you are so I know you're okay. I'm okay, I replied, and for the first time in a long time, it was true. I'm better than okay. I'm free. I hung up the phone and put it on silent. Outside, the city passed by like a blurry movie, and I allowed myself to imagine what my life would be like without having to walk on eggshells in my own house, without having to endure looks of contempt at breakfast, without having to listen to venomous comments about my age, my clothes, my habits. The taxi stopped in front of a small but well-kept house, with a garden full of red flowers and a white-painted iron gate. Before I could ring the bell, the door opened and Helen appeared, grayer than the last time I had seen her, but with the same warm smile I remembered from our days at the factory. Margaret, dear, she said, hugging me as if 5 years hadn't passed since we last saw each other. Welcome to your new home. Those words, your new home, sounded like heavenly music. It had been so long since I had felt welcome anywhere that I had forgotten what it felt like to be received with genuine love. Helen helped me with my suitcase and led me inside. The house smelled of cinnamon and coffee, scents that reminded me of my childhood when my mother baked cookies on Sundays and the house was filled with laughter instead of tension. Sit down, I'll make tea, Helen said, pointing to a beige armchair that looked comfortable and inviting. And I want you to tell me everything from the beginning. We have all night, and tomorrow too. For the first time in 5 years, I sat on a piece of furniture without worrying if it was allowed, without calculating if my presence would bother someone, without fear of being told to move because someone else wanted to use that spot. I sank into the armchair and closed my eyes. The silence of Helen's house was not the tense, hostile silence of Stephen's house. It was a peaceful silence, full of possibilities, full of the promise that maybe, just maybe, the best days of my life were still to come. That first night at Helen's house, I slept better than I had in the last 5 years. There were no stealthy footsteps in the hallway, no whispered conspiracies from the next room, no constant feeling of walking on eggshells. I woke up at 7 o'clock in the morning to the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the house like a morning hug. Helen was already awake, sitting in her small yellow kitchen, reading the newspaper with glasses that constantly slipped down her nose. When she saw me appear in the doorway, she smiled as if my presence were the best gift she had received in a long time. Good morning, sleeping beauty. How did you sleep? Like I haven't slept in years, I answered honestly, accepting the cup of coffee she offered me. The hot liquid went down my throat like a caress, and I realized it had been months since I had truly enjoyed a cup of coffee without rushing, without the pressure of having to get up immediately to make breakfast for people who didn't even say good morning. Helen sat across from me with her own cup, and for a few minutes we drank in comfortable silence. Outside, birds were singing in the garden she so lovingly maintained, and the sunlight filtered through the curtains, creating golden patterns on the wooden table. "Margaret," she finally said, "I need to tell you something important. Something that might change your perspective on your current situation." Her serious tone put me on alert. I set my cup on the table and looked at her intently. "What is it, Helen? Do you remember your sister Catherine?" The name hit me like a bolt of lightning. Catherine, my younger sister, with whom I had lost contact over 15 years ago after a family fight over our parents' inheritance. A silly argument that had grown huge because of both our pride and had ended with years of silence that neither of us had the courage to break. Of course I remember her. Why do you ask? Helen took a deep breath, as if she were about to announce something that would change everything. "Because she passed away 6 months ago, Margaret, and she left you something in her will." The world stopped. The cup trembled in my hands, and Helen had to take it before I dropped it. Catherine was dead, and I didn't even know. My little sister, with whom I had shared a room during our childhood, with whom I had laughed and fought and dreamed, had left this world without me being able to say goodbye, without us being able to fix things between us. How? How do you know? I managed to ask through the tears that began to fall without permission. Because I was the one who took care of her during her last months. We worked together at a sewing and alterations shop after we retired from the factory. She got sick with cancer, very fast, very aggressive. She looked for your number many times. She wanted to call you, but pride. Helen paused, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. Pride can be a terrible prison, can't it? I completely broke down. I cried for my dead sister, for the lost years, for the unsaid words, for all the chances at reconciliation we had let slip by. I cried until I felt my soul had been emptied of all the accumulated pain. Helen held me, as only women who have lived a long time know how to hold someone, with that perfect mix of firmness and tenderness that can contain a person who is falling apart. "There's more," she whispered when my sobs subsided. "Catherine had a house. A beautiful 2-story house in the center of town, which she bought with a lifetime of hard-earned savings. And she left it to you, Margaret. All of it, completely paid off, no debts." The words floated in the air like soap bubbles that my mind couldn't catch. A house? Catherine had left me a house? After 15 years of not speaking? "There's also money," Helen continued, pulling a thick manila envelope from one of the kitchen drawers. $47,000 in a savings account. And a letter. A letter she wrote for you before she died. With trembling hands, I took the envelope. My name was written in Catherine's familiar handwriting, that round, careful script I had admired since I was a child. Inside were legal documents, bank statements, and a 3-page handwritten letter. "My dearest sister Margaret," the letter began, and her voice seemed to whisper in my ear as I read. "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to tell you in person what I should have told you years ago. I am sorry. I am deeply sorry that we wasted so much time fighting over things that now seem so small." My tears fell onto the paper, smudging some of the words. But I kept reading. Catherine had known about my situation with Stephen and Nicole. She had asked about me, discreetly investigated how I was living, and had felt pain knowing I was being mistreated in my own home. "I wanted to call you 1,000 times, the letter said, but my stupid pride stopped me. Now that I know I am going to die, I realize that pride is worth nothing compared to a sister's love. I am leaving you my house and my savings because I know you will need them to start over, because I know you are strong and brave, even when you don't feel like it." The letter continued with memories of our childhood, with apologies for words said in moments of anger, with expressions of love that should have been spoken in life. It ended with a line that broke my heart. "I hope you use this second chance to be truly happy. I love you, sister. I always loved you." Helen watched me as I read, her eyes full of an understanding that only comes from witnessing another's pain. When I finished, I carefully folded the letter and held it against my chest as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "The documents are all in order," Helen said softly. "Catherine's lawyer took care of everything. The house is ready for you to move in whenever you want. It's yours, Margaret, completely yours." For the first time in 5 years, I felt rich. Not just because of the money or the property, but because of something deeper. The feeling of having options, of having power over my own life, of not depending on the poisoned charity of people who despised me. My phone, which had been silent all morning, began to vibrate insistently. It was Stephen, again. This time I decided to answer, but not with the broken, pleading voice of the desperate woman who had fled the day before. I answered with the firm voice of a woman who had just remembered her worth. "Hello, Stephen." "Mom!" "Thank God you answered. Listen, I've been thinking all night. Nicole and I talked, and we're willing to make some changes. We can give you more space, more freedom. Just come home, please." "Leo hasn't stopped asking for you." His voice sounded desperate, and something in his tone made me suspect there was more behind this conciliatory call. Maybe they had tried to manage the house without my help and realized how much work I did. Maybe Leo had thrown a tantrum. Or maybe they had simply calculated that they needed my pension to make ends meet. "Stephen," I said with a calmness that surprised me, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. How long had you been planning to send me to a nursing home?" The silence on the other end was so long, I thought the call had been disconnected. Finally, his voice came back, small and guilty. "Mom, it wasn't something planned. We had just explored options for the future. For when you were older and needed more care." "Options like what?" "Well, there are some very good places, with activities for seniors, with medical care." "How much do those places cost, Stephen?" Another pause. "Between $1,200 and $1,800 a month, depending on the level of care." I did some quick math. My pension was $450. Even if I sold my house, the money wouldn't have lasted more than 5 or 6 years in a decent place. After that, I would have been at the mercy of the public system, in one of those horrible homes you see on the news for neglect and abuse. "I see," I replied, "and I suppose my house would have helped finance that stay." "Mom, don't think like that. We just wanted to make sure you had the best possible care when I became too inconvenient for you to pretend you love me." I finished the sentence for him. I hung up the phone and placed it on the table. Helen watched me with a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you feeling okay?" she asked. I smiled, and my smile felt genuine for the first time in years. "I feel perfectly fine. In fact, I feel powerful." 3 days later, I stood in front of the house that was now mine, the keys trembling in my hand like leaves in the wind. It was a 2-story building, with terracotta-colored brick walls and large windows that allowed natural light to flood every corner. The front yard was a bit neglected, but I could see the potential beneath the weeds rose bushes that needed pruning, a small stone path leading to the front door, and a lemon tree that promised sweet fruit in the coming seasons. Helen was with me, holding a box with my few personal belongings that we had salvaged from my suitcase. For these 3 days, she had been my rock, my guide through the legal paperwork and the mountain of documents that had to be signed to make the property transfer official. "It's beautiful, Margaret," Helen said as we looked at the facade. "Catherine had very good taste." I nodded, unable to speak. Emotion had closed my throat like a fist. This house represented more than a roof over my head. It represented independence, dignity, the possibility of living my last years as a queen in my own castle instead of a grateful beggar in someone else's home. I opened the front door, and the smell that greeted me was like an embrace from the past. It smelled of clean, well-cared-for wood, and underneath it all, that soft lavender scent that Catherine had worn since she was a teenager. It was as if my sister was there, welcoming me home. The living room was spacious, with hardwood floors that shone even in the dim light filtering through the closed curtains. The furniture was covered with white sheets, like ghosts waiting to be awakened. When I removed one of the sheets, it revealed a wine-colored velvet sofa that looked comfortable and inviting. "Look at this," Helen whispered from the kitchen. "Margaret, come see this." I followed her to the back of the house and gasped. The kitchen was twice the size of the one in Stephen's house, with light wood cabinets, a central island perfect for preparing elaborate meals, and a window overlooking a backyard with a garden that looked like something out of a fairy tale. But what really made me cry was what we found on the kitchen table, a bottle of wine with a note attached that read, "To celebrate your new life, with eternal love, Catherine." Even in death, my sister had thought of every detail to make me feel welcome in my new home. My phone rang as we were exploring the second floor. It was Stephen, for the 5th time since morning. This time, his tone had changed drastically. "Mom, we need to talk. Nicole went to the bank to ask about the joint account, and they told her you had withdrawn your pension. What's going on?" I smiled as I ran my hand over the wooden banister of the staircase leading to the second floor. I had decided to move my pension to a completely new account at a different bank where only I had access. It was my money, after all, even though for 5 years they had treated it as a communal fund for household expenses. "What's going on, Stephen, is that I am finally taking control of my own life. But Mom, we depend on that pension for the household expenses. Without it, we can't pay the utilities, the food." "Oh, really?" I feigned surprise. "But Nicole told me I was a burden, a useless old woman who contributed nothing. If that's true, then my absence shouldn't affect your finances at all. Or am I mistaken?" The silence on the other end confirmed what I already knew. They had been living off my money while making me feel as if they were doing me a charity by giving me a roof and food. "Mom, please, be reasonable. Leo misses you so much. He asks for you every day." Mentioning Leo was like a direct stab to the heart. My grandson was the only part of that house I truly missed, the only one who had shown me genuine, unconditional love. "Leo asks for me? Or are you just telling me that to manipulate me emotionally?" "It's not manipulation, Mom. It's the truth. Yesterday he asked me if you had died because you're not answering his calls. That information hurt me deeply. I hadn't answered Leo's calls because I knew that if I heard his little voice asking me to come back, my resolve would crumble like a sandcastle in the rain. Stephen, I want to see Leo, but not in that house, and not with you and Nicole present. I want to spend time with my grandson without you two monitoring every word I say. That's irrational, Mom. We're his parents. And what am I? A dangerous stranger? For 5 years I took care of that child while you went out to have fun. I cooked his meals, helped him with his homework, comforted him when he had nightmares. Now it turns out I can't spend time with him alone? It's not that. Then what is it? Is it that you're afraid of what I might tell him? Right? You're afraid that Leo will find out how you've treated me, the things Nicole has said to me, how you humiliated me in my own house." I hung up before he could answer. Helen, who had been pretending not to listen while examining a beautiful wooden desk in what seemed to have been Catherine's study, came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Are you all right?" "I'm furious," I admitted, "but I'm also determined. Stephen and Nicole are going to learn that they can't treat me like dirt and then expect me to come running back when they need me." That afternoon, as we were organizing my things in my new room, a large suite with a private bathroom and a balcony overlooking the garden, I received an unexpected call. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Margaret Davis? This is Mr. Bennett from the law firm of Bennett and Associates. I was your sister Catherine's lawyer." "Oh yes, of course. How can I help you?" "Ma'am, there is something else you need to know about your sister's inheritance. Something I preferred to handle after you were settled in the house." My heart raced. Was there a legal problem? Some hidden debt that could take away everything I had just gained? What kind of something? "Your sister had a life insurance policy that was not included in the initial will because it required additional paperwork. A policy for the amount of $80,000. Mrs. Davis, you are the sole beneficiary." I had to sit on the bed because my legs turned to jelly. $80,000. Added to the $47,000 I already had, that made me a woman with over $120,000 in the bank. It was more money than I had ever seen in my entire life. Are you sure?" "Completely sure. I just need you to come to the office tomorrow to sign some documents and the money will be transferred to your account within 24 hours. After hanging up, I sat in silence for several minutes, processing this new reality. Not only did I have a beautiful house and enough money to live comfortably, but I had the financial freedom to make decisions that were previously impossible. Helen came in with a cup of tea and sat beside me on the bed. "From the look on your face, I'd say you've received good news." I told her about the insurance policy, and her eyes widened like saucers. "Margaret, do you realize what this means? It means you can live however you want, for the rest of your life. It means you will never again have to put up with mistreatment for financial dependence." She was right. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely independent. I didn't need alimony from a husband who had abandoned me. I didn't need the poisoned charity of a son who despised me. I didn't need anyone's permission for anything. That night, as I lay in my own bed, in my own house, with my own rules, I thought about Nicole and her spit. I thought about Stephen and his complicit silence. I thought about all the times I had felt small, invisible, useless. But most of all, I thought about what I was going to do next. Because a woman with a paid-off house and over $100,000 in the bank has options that a desperate, dependent woman never has. And I had plans for those options. A week after moving into my new house, I decided it was time to confront Stephen and Nicole on my own terms. For those 7 days, I had ignored their desperate calls, their text messages that swung between pleading and threats, and I had used that time to carefully plan my next move. On Friday morning, I dressed with special care. I chose a coral-colored suit I had bought the day before at a downtown boutique, black leather shoes that made me feel powerful when I walked, and the gold earrings I had inherited from my mother. I put on a little makeup, styled my hair in an elegant bun, and looked at myself in the mirror until I saw the reflection of the woman I had always been inside. Dignified, strong, deserving of respect. I called a taxi and gave the address I knew by heart, but which now felt like foreign territory. During the ride, I mentally rehearsed what I was going to say, how I would handle their reactions, what cards I would play, and at what exact moment. The taxi stopped in front of my old house, and for a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with pain. It had only been 8 days since I had left dragging a suitcase, but it felt like an eternity. The house looked exactly the same, but I was a completely different person. I rang the doorbell firmly. I heard hurried footsteps on the other side, and when the door opened, Nicole's surprised face was so comical it almost made me laugh. Her eyes scanned my outfit from top to bottom, clearly shocked by my transformation. "Margaret," she stammered. What a surprise. You look different." "Hello, Nicole. I've come to speak with you and Stephen. Is he home?" She nodded, still processing my new appearance. "Yes, he's in the living room. Come in." I entered the house that had been my prison for 5 years, and immediately noticed the changes. The living room was messy. There were dirty dishes on the coffee table, and it smelled faintly of burnt food. Clearly, my absence had had a bigger impact than they had anticipated. Stephen appeared from the kitchen with an expression of relief mixed with nervousness. "Mom, thank God you came. We've been so worried about you. Where have you been staying?" "I've been staying at my house," I replied calmly, taking a seat in the armchair I previously wouldn't have dared to use without permission. "Your house?" Nicole frowned. "What house? Did you rent something? With what money?" I smiled, savoring the moment. "With the money my sister Catherine left me when she died 6 months ago. Along with a beautiful house in the center of town and a rather generous bank account. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife." Stephen collapsed onto the sofa as if someone had knocked the wind out of him. Nicole stood there, her mouth slightly open, processing the implications of what she had just heard. "Your sister died?" Stephen finally found his voice. "Why didn't we know?" "Because for 15 years we had no contact because of a silly fight over our parents' inheritance. A fight that now seems ridiculous compared to how you two have treated me." My voice remained firm, without a trace of the vulnerability I had shown for years. "How much money?" Nicole went straight to the point, as was typical of her. "Enough to never again need anyone's poisoned charity," I replied. "Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life without having to put up with someone spitting in my food." Nicole turned as red as a tomato. That was. It was a moment of stress. "I didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to what?" I interrupted. "Didn't mean to humiliate me in front of my grandson? Didn't mean to make me feel like a beggar in my own home? Didn't mean to call me a useless old woman who would soon be in a nursing home?" Stephen leaned forward, his hands clasped as if in prayer. "Mom, we can talk about this. We can work things out. Nicole will apologize. Right, honey?" Nicole looked at him as if he had asked her to jump off a building, but finally mumbled something that might have passed for an apology if you squinted and used a lot of imagination. I didn't come here for apologies, I said clearly. I came here to inform you of some changes that are going to happen. I pulled a folder from my handbag that I had carefully prepared with the help of the lawyer, Mr. Bennett. First, this house, as you know, is in my name, fully paid for by my work at the factory for 20 years. Mom, we know it's your house, but we've lived here, we've made improvements. What improvements, Stephen? I looked him directly in the eyes. The hole in the bathroom wall you've been promising to fix for 2 years? The dripping shower? The loose floorboards that almost made me fall 3 times? He blushed, clearly remembering all the times he had promised to make repairs and never had. The point is, I continued, that I am going to sell this house. I have already contacted a real estate agent, and he is coming to do an appraisal next week. Nicole jumped up from the sofa as if she'd been pricked with a pin. You can't sell the house from under us. We live here. Leo goes to school nearby. I can, and I will sell my house, I replied with a calmness that surprised me. You have 30 days to find another place to live. That's what the law states when the owner decides to sell a property occupied by relatives. Stephen looked as if he was about to be sick. Mom, you can't do this. We're your family. My family? I stood up from the armchair, feeling every inch of my height. My family wouldn't have spat in my food. My family wouldn't have treated me like a maid. My family wouldn't have planned to send me to a nursing home to take my things. We never planned that, Nicole protested, but her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. I took out my phone and played a recording I had made during one of Stephen's calls. His own voice filled the room. There are some very good places with activities for seniors, between $1,200 and $1,800 a month. Their faces turned white as paper. They hadn't expected me to have evidence of their plans. Second point, I continued, consulting my notes. Leo, I want to establish a formal visitation schedule. Alternate weekends, he comes to stay with me at my house. Without your supervision. No way, Nicole shouted. You're not going to fill my son's head with poison against us. Poison? I laughed coldly. Like the poison you injected into him when you forced him to watch you spit in my food? That kind of poison? Mom, Stephen tried to mediate. Maybe we can come to an agreement. Maybe? There is no maybe, I interrupted. These are my conditions. They are non-negotiable. You have 30 days to vacate my house, and we will establish visitation with Leo through my lawyer if necessary. Your lawyer? Nicole practically spat the words. Now you have a lawyer? I have a lot of things I didn't have a week ago, I replied, putting the papers back in my handbag, including self-respect. I walked to the door, feeling their gazes on my back like daggers. Before leaving, I turned around one last time. Oh, and one more thing. Leo deserves to know the truth about what happened here. He deserves to understand that a real family doesn't treat their loved ones like that. When he's ready, when he's older, I will tell him the whole story. Not to turn him against you, but to teach him how not to treat the people he loves. I left that house with my head held high and my heart pounding from a mixture of triumph and sadness. Triumph because I had finally reclaimed my power. Sadness because I had to go to such lengths for my own son to respect me. The taxi was waiting for me outside, and as we drove away, I didn't look back. There was nothing in that house worth remembering with nostalgia. Everything good in my life was now ahead, waiting for me in my new home. 2 weeks after my confrontation with Stephen and Nicole, my new life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't experienced in decades. I woke up when my body felt rested, not when Leo's cries or Nicole's complaints pulled me from sleep. I had breakfast on my back porch, surrounded by the garden I was slowly restoring, watching the flowers Catherine had planted come back to life under my care. But the most beautiful thing of all was the silence. Not the tense silence of walking on eggshells, but the peaceful silence of a woman who was finally at peace with herself. That Tuesday morning, as I was watering the roses that had begun to bloom again, I heard a knock at my door. Through the window, I saw a small, familiar figure that made my heart race. Leo. I ran to the door, and when I opened it, my grandson threw himself into my arms with the desperate force of a child who has missed someone deeply. Behind him, at a safe distance, was Stephen, with an expression that mixed shame and defeat. Grandma Margaret. Leo buried his face in my neck, and I could feel his wet tears against my skin. I missed you so much. I thought you had died because you didn't answer my calls. My heart broke and mended itself at the same time. I hugged my grandson as if he were the most precious thing in the world, because he truly was. Oh, my love, I didn't die. I was just rearranging my life. But never. Listen to me. I could never die without saying goodbye to you first. Leo pulled away to look at me, his big eyes still shiny with tears. Dad says you live in a new house now. Is it true? Yes, my love. Would you like to see it? It's very beautiful, and it has a garden where we could plant anything you want. His eyes lit up as if I had mentioned Disneyland. Really? Could I plant tomatoes? I love tomatoes. I laughed, a genuine laugh that hadn't escaped me in years. We could plant all the tomatoes you want, and flowers too, and maybe a small herb garden for cooking. Stephen approached timidly, clearly uncomfortable but determined to speak. Mom, could we? Could we talk for a moment? Alone. I looked at Leo and stroked his hair. My love, why don't you go explore the backyard while I talk to Dad? But be careful with the roses. Some still have thorns. Leo nodded excitedly and ran into the backyard as if he had found a personal amusement park. Stephen and I were left in the living room, the air between us thick with unsaid words and still bleeding wounds. Mom, he began, and his voice sounded like that of a small child who knows he's done something terrible. I came to apologize. For real. Not for convenience. Not because I need something from you, but because I've realized how horrible we've been to you. I sat on my new sofa, the one I had chosen myself without having to ask anyone's permission, and studied him carefully. There was something different about him, something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine humility. Go on, I said simply. When you left, at first we were angry. Nicole said you were being dramatic, that you'd be back in a few days asking for forgiveness. But after a week, he ran his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture from his childhood. Mom, we didn't know how much you did in that house. We didn't know how much we needed you. What happened after I left? I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. Everything fell apart, he admitted, his voice cracking. The house became a disaster. Nicole and I couldn't stop fighting because neither of us knew how to handle everything you did. Leo asked for you constantly, and every time he mentioned your name, Nicole would get hysterical. He paused, taking a deep breath, as if gathering courage for what came next. And then there's the money. Mom, without your pension, we can't pay the basic bills. We tried to get full-time jobs, but with Leo and everything, his voice trailed off. And Nicole? She realized her mistakes too. Stephen looked down. Nicole left. The words fell between us like stones in still water. She left? What do you mean she left? She took Leo 3 days ago and went to her mother's house. She says she can't live in a house that's going to be sold, that she can't live with the uncertainty of not knowing if we'll have money to eat next month. His voice completely broke. She says if I want to get my family back, I have to choose between her and you. For a moment, I felt a fierce satisfaction. Nicole had shown her true colors. When things got tough, when she could no longer live comfortably off my dime, she had fled like the rat she had always been. But then I saw the pain in my son's eyes, and I remembered that despite everything that had happened, he was still the baby I had held in my arms, the boy I had raised alone when his father abandoned us. And what are you going to do? I asked him softly. I don't know, he whispered. Mom, I've been a terrible son. I let my wife mistreat you in your own house. I planned to send you to a nursing home to please her. I chose her comfort over your dignity time and time again. Tears began to stream down his cheeks. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Not for me, but for Leo. He loves you, Mom. He talks about you all the time. I moved closer to him, and after so many years, I saw again the scared little boy who used to hide behind my skirts during thunderstorms. I put a hand on his shoulder, feeling him crumble under my touch. Stephen, I said softly, I forgive you, but forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it definitely doesn't mean going back to the way things were. He looked up, hope and fear dancing in his eyes. What does it mean then? It means we start over, but with clear rules. It means if you want to have a relationship with me, it will be based on mutual respect, not financial convenience. It means Leo can spend time with me whenever he wants, without interference from you or Nicole. And the house. The house is being sold. That decision doesn't change. But, I paused, an idea forming in my mind. There's something we could do, something that could benefit all of us. His eyes lit up with curiosity and hope. This house has 4 bedrooms. It's too big for me alone. If you've really changed, if you're really willing to treat me with the respect I deserve, you could move in here, you and Leo. Not Nicole. Really? His voice was barely a whisper, but with very clear conditions, I continued firmly. You pay rent, not much, but something to remind you that this is my house, not a favor I'm doing for you. You help with the chores. You respect my rules and my space. And if you ever disrespect me again, or allow anyone else to, you leave immediately. Stephen nodded so vigorously I thought he would hurt his neck. Yes, Mom. Yes to everything. I promise. At that moment, Leo appeared at the patio door, dirt on his hands and a smile that lit up his whole face. Grandma, your garden is amazing. Can we really plant tomatoes together? I looked at him. Then I looked at my son, who was crying tears of gratitude on my sofa, and I made a decision that would change everything again. Yes, my love, I told Leo. We're going to plant a lot of tomatoes. And maybe, if Dad is very good, he can stay and help us. 6 months after that cursed Sunday when Nicole spat on my plate, I was sitting on my porch, watching Leo carefully water the tomatoes we had planted together. His small hands held the watering can with the seriousness of a surgeon, focused on giving each plant exactly the amount of water it needed. Grandma Margaret, he said without looking up from his work, do you think the tomatoes will be ready for my birthday? I smiled, calculating mentally. His birthday was in 3 weeks, and the tomatoes were already showing small green fruits that promised an abundant harvest. I think so, my love. And when they're ready, we'll make the most delicious tomato sauce in the world. Leo jumped with excitement, staining his shirt with damp earth. In these 6 months, he had grown so much that sometimes I had trouble recognizing the shy, scared boy who had witnessed that humiliation. Now he was more confident, happier, freer to just be a kid. Stephen appeared at the kitchen door, drying his hands on a cloth. In these months, he had changed as much as Leo, but in different ways. He had slimmed down a bit from the physical labor he now did as a supervisor at a construction company, a job he had gotten after realizing he needed to support himself and his son without depending on anyone else. How are the farmers doing? He asked, approaching us with a genuine smile I hadn't seen on his face in years. Dad, look how big the tomatoes are. Leo ran to him, taking his hand to drag him towards the plants. Grandma says they'll be red for my birthday. Stephen bent down to examine the plants with the seriousness Leo's most important project deserved. Wow, they look amazing. They're going to be the tastiest tomatoes in the whole city. I watched this interaction between father and son with a mixture of joy and melancholy. Joy because Leo finally had his father's full attention and unconditional love. Melancholy because I wondered how things would have been if Stephen had been like this from the beginning, before Nicole turned him into a lesser version of himself. Nicole had tried to come back twice in these 6 months. The first time, she arrived with tears and apologies, promising she had changed, that she had understood her mistakes. Stephen listened to her politely and then told her he had made his decision. His son and his mother were more important than his marriage. Nicole left in a fury, screaming threats about taking Leo and never letting us see him again. The second time, she came with a lawyer, trying to claim rights to the house where she had lived for 5 years. The meeting lasted exactly 10 minutes, the time it took my lawyer, Mr. Bennett, to explain to her that she had no legal right to a property that had never been in her name and for which she had never paid a single cent. Since then, she had been silent, although we knew from mutual friends that she had moved in permanently with her mother and was telling everyone that we had unjustly thrown her out onto the street. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Helen, calling as she did every Tuesday for our ritual of catching up on neighborhood news and planning our activities for the week. "How's my favorite entrepreneur?" she asked, with that warmth that had made our friendship flourish even more in these months. I laughed. Entrepreneur was the joke she had started 3 months ago when I decided to use some of Catherine's money for something I had been passionate about my whole life: sewing. I had bought 3 professional sewing machines and had turned one of the rooms in the house into a small workshop where I did alterations for the women in the neighborhood. What had started as a hobby to keep me busy had turned into a thriving little business. The ladies came not only because I did good work, but because my house had become a haven where women could talk freely about their problems while I fixed their dresses and their lives with the same patience. "I have a new client for you," Helen continued. "Her name is Vanessa. Can you believe it? A young woman who is going through a situation very similar to yours. Her mother-in-law treats her horribly. She lives in her husband's family's house, and she feels like a stranger in her own life." The name made me laugh with irony. What a coincidence with the name. "Sure, tell her to come by tomorrow afternoon. Leo will be at school and Stephen at work, so we can talk freely." After hanging up, I thought about how life takes such strange turns. 6 months ago, I was the desperate woman who needed help, and now I was the woman helping others in similar situations. It wasn't just the money that had changed my life, but the recovery of my own dignity and the understanding that I deserved respect. That afternoon, as I was preparing dinner in my kitchen, where I could cook whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, without having to ask for permission or endure dismissive comments, I reflected on everything that had happened. Nicole's spit on my plate had been the most humiliating moment of my life, but it had also been my liberation. Because sometimes we need to hit rock bottom to realize we deserve much more than what we are receiving. Leo ran in from the garden, his cheeks flushed from exercise and a smile that could light up an entire city. "Grandma, you know what? I told my teacher about our tomatoes, and she said when they're ready, I can bring some to share with the class." "I think that's a wonderful idea," I replied, hugging him and feeling his pure, unconditional love fill all the empty spaces that years of mistreatment had left in my heart. Stephen appeared at the kitchen door, his work uniform dirty, but with an expression of satisfaction I had learned to recognize. It was the face of a man who had honestly earned his day's work, who could look his son in the eyes knowing he had done the right thing. "How was your day, Mom?" he asked, and the question was genuine, not an empty formality as it had been for years. "It was perfect," I replied. "And it was true. And yours?" "Perfect, too. The supervisor complimented me on the work on the new school project. He says he's going to recommend me for a promotion." I saw the pride in his eyes, the pride of a man who had learned to value himself for his own merits instead of living at the expense of others. He was the son I had always hoped he would be, the father Leo deserved to have. That night, after Leo had fallen asleep and Stephen had retired to his room to study for his upcoming promotion exam, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and looked at the stars. I thought of Catherine, of how her final act of love had been to give me the freedom I needed to discover who I really was when no one was humiliating me. I thought of all the women who came to my sewing workshop, seeking not just to have their clothes fixed, but to have the broken pieces of their self-esteem sewn back together. I thought of Nicole, wondering if she would ever realize that the power she had wielded over me was false, built on my own insecurity and my fear of being alone. I wondered if she would ever understand that true respect cannot be demanded, only earned. But most of all, I thought of myself, of the 67-year-old woman who had discovered that it is never too late to start over, to reclaim your dignity, to build the life you deserve to have. Nicole's spit had been her downfall, not mine, because it had awakened me from a slumber of resignation and had reminded me that I am Margaret, a strong, hard-working woman, worthy of love and respect. A woman who doesn't need anyone's approval to know her own value. And that woman, finally, was home.